Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Visit them on the web at recursivesquirrel.com. Episode 634, Reaching the Hybrid Audience. For Monday, April 26th, 2021. It's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob Norton. Thanks for joining us. We are on a rapidly approaching collision course with a long-discussed, much maligned tactic: digital insertion of products and marketing communications into classic films and television. Are we getting used to the idea, or is it still a mistake? Tonight we'll discuss. Also, the impact of a European Super League, whether streaming live theater will continue, building diversity from the ground up, plus this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the Vice President of Digital Marketing at Westfield, Mr. Chris Baccus. Chris, welcome back.
Hey, thanks a lot. Got my first vaccine. I'm ready for number 2 in about a week and a half, and happy to be here.
I got my second vaccine on Friday, so I'm all vaccinated. It was an interesting weekend of side effects for Whitney, though. So. It's another story for another day.
I hope she's okay now.
She is. We're both real happy to have it done. Now, next we have the founder and CEO of social media education company Social Fresh, Mr. Jason Keath. Hi, Jason.
Hey, Bob. Happy to be here, and I am also fully vaccinated in the South. So I don't know if that really matters down here, but it's still true.
Congratulations. Well, North Carolina has a good reputation so far of managing this real well. Go. So I'm not surprised. And finally, she's the Vice President of Social Media at 9 Rooftops, Miss Sloane Kelley. I almost called you a mister. Sorry about that.
That wouldn't be the first time. All good. Nice to be here, Bob. Also, fully vaccinated. Woohoo.
All right, we're getting there. Slowly but surely, we are getting there. Well, we've talked a long time about and experimented with digital advertising and brand insertions into classic films and television. It's not exactly my favorite topic. I don't really like this idea. But now it's finally becoming a reality. We're hearing more and more about companies that are actively doing this. So I thought it would be a good time to revisit the subject and maybe gauge everybody's opinions about it and thoughts about the whole tactic and where it's going. Chris, what are your opinions of the tactic, and what are the liabilities and benefits? I've got an emergency going on outside of my studio.
No problem. Don't worry about the sirens.
Maybe I'll go on mute while you answer this question.
Sounds good, Bob. I wish we could digitally remove the sirens. Let's see here. It kind of reminds me of video games, and doing it with they're doing it with music videos. They're experimenting it with TV shows. I know Modern Family's kind of been one that they're looking at, kind of taking a lot of their syndicated shows and possibly adding in some of this new technology. And AI, I think we're going to see a lot of this. We see it with sports. We definitely see it. Whether it's on a football field or a baseball stadium. So it's going to be cropping up everywhere. I think we're going to get kind of used to it. The bigger question is, can we get used to it, and can it really be contextual, not distracting and annoying, and does it find a way to kind of fit in there without taking away from the art and the creativity of what you're watching and experiencing? And I think that's what we worry about kind of the most, I think, as consumers and people who, love shows and love movies. I'm a huge movie nut. And so, the more advertising and stuff like that, if it gets in there, I guess it's okay if it creeps in there in a way that, is kind of, not distracting and out of the way and into the way. But I think that's what we're most worried about. I think that's what these companies are trying to look at. There's a company called Myriad out of the UK that's really trying to find a way to bring it in there in a contextual way and do it kind of in a way that maybe even fits some of the emotional aspects of the moment of what you're watching. So if they're able to do it and do it thoughtfully, then, I guess I'm okay with it. And I guess we'll see how it goes.
Well, I'm a little confused about the benefits of this still. I mean, when you do marketing, you're supposed to look at the benefits to the consumer as being the guiding force about what you're supposed to be marketing to them. I mean, obviously, you have your brand objective, and then you have the customer's permissions. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, what possible benefit does the consumer get out of this? This is a tactic that is entirely focused on making the job of the marketer easier. And I don't see that as being something that will gain mass acceptance. Am I wrong about that?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily about making the job easier for the marketer. I think what a lot of creative outlets like film and especially TV are dealing with, I can't even think of a TV show I watch anymore that's on regular TV that has commercials going. Everything we watch is streaming. You could completely buy, Hulu without ads and stuff like that too, which we've done because it's annoying to have all the ads within it. So I think the advertisers are trying to find a way with the creators, because listen, the creators depend on the advertising to, fund these shows and make them happen. I think what's happening here is, how do we, as advertisers and creators that need the financial benefits of advertising, to go ahead and produce what we're going to do, and do it in a way where people can't fast forward or skip through it or whatever, and it becomes, like I said, more contextual and part of the actual creative itself. And so they need to kind of insert that, and also insert it in a way that, maybe you see something different than what I see because of different preferences and things that you like to shop for. So again, maybe it's more relevant to me, where I'm in, they can look at more data. And so I think it's that kind of trade-off that's trying to happen, because listen, I think trying to do all this creative content without any advertising funding and finding a way to make the advertising, more acceptable, and also, like I said, not skippable.
You're making great points
you're
making great points about programmatic and new content. I think I think you're making very relevant, interesting points about that. But we're talking about classic films. I mean, this is sunk cost. This is just buckets of money, more money for the owners of the content. It doesn't seem to be. I'm still struggling with it. Maybe I'm going to get Sloane's opinion about this. What are your thoughts about inserting into classic television, classic movies? What are the liabilities? And more importantly, what I keep focusing on, what are the benefits to consumers? Does this make for a better experience in any way, shape, or form?
I mean, the classic film is definitely where I struggle with this. I mean, I think the points on more current productions and things like that, it's super valid. And there's probably a lot more room there to make things sort of truly contextual. But, as a content creator myself, I mean, certainly not a movie maker or a maker of classic film, but I love classic film. So much goes into the composition of a shot. And there could be ads that have appeared in the background of a classic film, and they're there on purpose. And sometimes they could be excluded on purpose. So, inserting a current brand into those scenes in classic film might not only be distracting for the viewer, but it also could truly change the meaning or the intent behind something. So that definitely gives me a lot of pause. And, in terms of what the benefit is for the viewer, I definitely struggle with that too.
But I think that's a great point, Sloane, and Bob too. But again, I think if there's a thoughtful way to go ahead and do it, and so yeah, obviously, if you're going to have, I don't know, let's take a film like The Killing Fields or something. I don't know why that popped into my head, but it did.
That's so weird.
There's a lot of street action in it. It's a great classic film. I enjoy it. I'll watch it anytime I bump into it. Sam Waterston's awesome in it. But anyway, there's a lot of kind of action and things going on inside kind of the street and the cafes and all that kind of stuff. And so you could insert like a Coca-Cola ad that might not have been there before. Obviously, you're not going to insert, the orange vanilla flavored Coke that's available today. You're going to probably have a Coke ad that's from, what is it, the 1960s or 50s? I'm sorry, I'm screwing up on my history.
No, that's a great point, because there's got to be best practices.
Make it contextual too, so it's not so disruptive, and still kind of sell that product or have a aspect of that product. But I agree with you, Sloane. I don't like the idea of advertising that didn't really belong there to kind of get in the way of the creative shots, especially of filmmakers that definitely take a lot of time, and I'm sure would be pretty angry with a bunch of inserted advertising into their art, if you will. So I guess that definitely gets a lot more complicated with the classic films than redoing kind of a recent modern TV show that you might put a few things into.
Jason, are we just being whiners? Are we just whining too much? Because this is a reality and it's coming, and there's nothing we're going to do about it. It is a freight train, and there's nothing that's going to stop this. No matter how much we want to preserve the integrity of classic films and classic television, it's going to have digital ads inserted in it because money, simple and plain. But so what are your thoughts about it? I mean, is there a way that we can make peace with it and work with it and do it in a smart way? Are there best practices that we should follow?
Well, I mean, the oldest version, some of the oldest versions of advertising were in your face, like Colgate Variety Hour. It was upfront. It was all about, this show is brought to you by this brand that we're going to knock you over the head with. And I think it reminds me that sometimes advertising is very in your face, and people kind of expect it to be sometimes. I think context is great. I think Chris is right. It either needs to be really contextual, which is hard for the classic films, or it needs to be completely without any context whatsoever. Like, one of the examples of something that would probably be a bad example was Charlie Chaplin selling White Claw in one of the articles I read. And you know what? Yeah. I would love to watch that. That would be amazing. I would love to see, out of context stuff. And so would like a ton of millennials and Generation Z kids that have never even watched something from Charlie Chaplin, right? So I think, there's a lot of fun to be had. I think I never take product placement too seriously. It does occasionally draw me out of shows or movies, but, it's something I laugh at and move on from really quickly. And I think you can play with that and you can have fun with it, or you can be really contextual and have something that's very relevant. I think both are options, but I'd love to see what people do with it.
Is there a way to segregate this and have this tactic apply? I mean, like when they bring this subject up, it sounds like film owners or rights owners are the ones who are having it inserted into classic programming, or networks that can stream this or otherwise broadcast the film or TV show, that they're going to put it in their content dynamically as they're going through showing this online or on over the air. I mean, I'm looking at it in that framework. Is there a way for the movie to exist without the ads and with the ads, or are the ads going to be in them all the time? And that's my biggest question. I mean, the dynamic insertion sounds like an interesting move, but it would disrupt the flow of the movie and take you out of the, suspension of disbelief.
That's called Hulu. You pay for the original version, or you get the placement version for free.
Right. So, I mean, I'm trying to wrap my head around how this could work in a way that is acceptable for film buffs and for the average viewer who just ends up on It's a Wonderful Life at 3 a.m. on a Christmas Eve. You know what I mean? It's just like there's got to be a way for both to exist so that you can see the classic film and you're not getting served all the time this remastered classic film with all the ads in it, or all the product placements, or whatever has been done to the film to change it. I mean, just look at what happened to George Lucas from the fans when he changed something in Star Wars. He changed something in Star Wars and everybody lost their crap. And that's just changing the content of a film in like subtle ways here and there. But when you're talking about putting ads in, I just see this as being a huge outcry unless it's if you're not preserving the original film as well. I mean, I'm struggling through this, guys, so this isn't really as much of a question as much as me, kind of free-forming. But what do you think? What do you guys think about this? I mean, is there a way that both can exist, and will that in any way diminish the effectiveness of the ads when they're put into these programs.
Well, maybe it's selected on what it is. I agree with you that there are classic films, and even The Killing Fields. By the way, at 1970s, I did Google real quick. I was a little off there, so pardon me on that. It felt wrong. So anyway, maybe there's things that are just kind of left untouched, and not everything needs to go ahead and be handled this way. And you brought up earlier, Bob, that I brought up the fact that maybe this is kind of a revenue way. It's a way to kind of fund new creative or the creative that's kind of going out there. So this is something that's already kind of there. It already existed. It's kind of just generating residual income and kind of going on there. But listen, all of that is beneficial and a big part of what funds future projects too. So, even though it's something that's already established and done, it is, by its nature going to go ahead and fund future kind of creative endeavors as well too. But, you're right on the consumer experience. What's the big benefit here as a consumer? Listen, the best benefit is don't touch the cool stuff I like to watch. So, and don't touch it from the director and the people that kind of went in there with their creative eye to it. Maybe this is something where it does happen more so with not necessarily films that are kind of in the canon of amazing produced films, because you're right, that people will go completely nuts. I mean, George Lucas, there's nothing subtle about what he did to Star Wars, let's be honest, and use that word. But, there was, a lot of pushback on whenever you go ahead and make changes. And so for a company, a big corporate entity, to go ahead and make a bunch of advertising overlays into a piece of artwork that everyone loves, yeah, I don't think that's probably where they're going to kind of go. I would hope not. Maybe it kind of happens with lesser films or lesser kind of pieces of content, or even newer pieces of content where that disruption is not as dramatic as something that's so beloved by everyone from the classics, if you will. So I would love to see an example of a classic one. There wasn't really much that was kind of talked about in any of the articles or thoughts of what's happening there, but there was kind of this nod that, you could do this kind of to classic films. Well, let's see what that looks like, and let's see how nuts, all of us film buffs and go. And also, unfortunately, the creative people behind that project too, who will go completely nuts with it if done wrong. Or probably even if done right.
maybe I'm just too getting old or something, but it just feels like a lazy tactic. It's just like there can be a case made for this being a really good way to introduce a product, or potentially to reinvigorate a legacy product or a legacy brand. I can see some scenarios where it could be really useful. But 90% of the time, it's going to be just like those Facebook ads. It's going to be everybody hopping on doing this, and it's not going to be done as elegantly as I wish it would be. So we'll just have to wait and see what's happening. But moving on, the world's soccer community last week was thrown into turmoil as a group of the best-known football clubs announced that they would be breaking away to form the European Superstar League. I think that's what it's called, a Superstar, ESL. Now, many fans blame the American owners for the move, since it's obviously an advertising rights money grab. Sloane, is this as terrible for soccer as fans fear, or simply an inevitable reality? I mean, you've got certain teams in leagues like the Premier League that are just powerhouses. They're internationally known. They've got world famous players, and then you've got teams that are not as well known, that are still playing because they've been through regulation. They're entitled to some of the revenue, and this is the best team saying, basically, we don't want these other teams to have any revenue because we're the ones bringing all the eyeballs, so we want to have our own league. Is that ruining soccer, or is that just the reality of business that, the best teams want to have something where they can make more money?
Yeah, this, as a sports person and a professional that's worked in sports, this was all over my feeds all week. European Super League, I think, was the nomenclature. But just before we kind of dive further into the topic, just to be very clear, like, the announcement rolled out and within 2 days it fell apart. So it is not happening right now, but that doesn't mean that what happened this week isn't incredibly important, because there is a much, I think, bigger story here. And it really comes down to the sports business model. That this, isn't a problem that's unique to Europe or even to football. It's happening across the sports landscape, and COVID certainly accelerated it. You know, you have all of these leagues and teams sort of across sports that took a huge hit. And, you know, kind of what I'm getting at when I talk about the business model is that for most leagues and teams, their revenue is dependent on broadcast rights or having events that people can buy tickets to or some combination therein. And of course, advertising revenue is very much tied up in both of those. You know, if you are even having events like we've been having in COVID times, but you don't have fans in the stands, you're going to take a hit when it comes to advertising revenue. So, you know, unexpectedly with all of these events that couldn't happen last year, and of course the changes and how they some of them did finally get back, it really created, I think, a different landscape for viewership. And in some cases, even as these games have come back, the broadcast ratings aren't even there like they necessarily were in the past. So the big question really, you know, certainly for European football, as well as other sports, is really how do things evolve? Like, you have your core fan, and that's really the person that the business model is based upon. But what about the broader set of people? What about a younger generation that's consuming content in really different ways? And how can teams and leagues create something that's entertaining for them, but also something that can be monetized? And you know, I think the interesting thing for me, like kind of just as an outsider looking in, this European Super League sort of made the assumption that they could just take the most popular teams, stack them up against each other, and that people would tune in on television. But would they really? Like that, even that setup, if it were to come to fruition, is still based on this old business model. So I don't even see how something like this could solve their issue. And not to mention the smaller teams, like you mentioned before. That's another really big part of this.
I've got to imagine that they have some kind of data to guide them in this direction. I mean, that's why I'm wondering whether or not this is going to be inevitable and there's no way to avoid it. Because when you have the two better teams playing, your television ratings go up. I mean, at least that's what the article seemed to be suggesting to me.
Well, it was interesting in my house. I am married to a European, and when this topic came up, like, he was just totally like, oh, whatever. They've been talking about this for decades. And like, here I am getting really sucked into this story and just all the back and forth. I mean, you had protests happening in different cities in Europe. You had world leaders chiming in on this. Like, it was a really big deal. And his reaction was just like, oh yeah, they've been talking about this for years. It's never happened. I'm not worried about it. And so, I mean, there's something to be said for that too. Like, you know, I don't know, will something like this happen for soccer, or sorry, for football? It's
okay. You can call it soccer. We're in America.
I know. I get corrected on that all the time in my house as well. But you know, the business question there to me though really does, like, it is interesting because yeah, you can take your best teams and stack them up against each other, but if you're tuning into broadcast television, there's just, you know, if you're not with the rules or changing the game and you're just presenting it in the same format, people might tune in, but they might also not, especially as we look at that younger generation. And you even look at stuff, you know, happening here with American football, you know, that the NFL had what I thought was at least an innovative, like, take on something new. I don't know that I would want to watch every game like this, but they partnered up with Nickelodeon earlier this year for sort of a different view of the same game that you could catch over on whatever network would happen to be airing it. And it was awesome. Like, you had like players getting slimed and like all kinds of stuff going on in the field. And it just, you know, it speaks to the fact that, like, just packaging something up the same way that we've always done before in sports might not work for a different generation.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, the fact is that we've and you made it right from the beginning, is that the television model and the whole focus on broadcast rights is getting to be antiquated, because we have to think of it differently, especially considering that so much of American sports right now is moving towards streaming, and we have all these streaming opportunities, and they're not exclusive deals being done all the time. So it's interesting. Jason, what's your thoughts on all this? I mean, does it look like this is inevitable at some point for European soccer to become something that is more in line with what we have in the U.S., or is this something that like Sloane's husband, that they're just going to just assume it's never going to happen and it's never going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very touchy subject. I think we can clearly see that from the fact that it fell apart within literally hours of when it launched. And it feels to me like what would happen if you put Americans in charge of European football. All capitalism with like none of the tradition that makes it unique or special, but all of the money, right? So I think, it may happen one day, but I think, the note that European teams and all teams need to focus on more digital distribution and less exclusive, all the video of the games has to go through one or two channels.
Right.
Like that's key in every sport's moving in that direction. But just in general, like I think we're underweighting the amount of tradition of relegation and just the structure of European football and how important that is, and how much of the drama and the allegiance is embedded in that system. In the U.S., we don't have any of that. We don't have anything that happens to you if you lose. If you're the bottom of the league, there's a lot less drama and a lot more adherence to, that's just my team. They're going to do good. They're going to do bad. I'll watch when they do good. In Europe, you watch when they do really bad, because it could be dire consequences. They could drop a league. So, I mean, you lose that. And, that's very dramatic for the fan, but it's also very tough for, it's like a Fortune 500 company dropping out of the Fortune 500 because they all of a sudden don't have enough revenue to keep up that spot, right? It's a very dramatic move for business and for the fans. So I get why they want to get rid of that system, but you just have too much built up tradition and history, and everybody from presidents of countries to every single fan in a continent are against it. So that's tough to PR your way around.
Yeah, I mean, and also the individual players were going to be sanctioned if they went along with this and they continued to play for these teams. I mean, they were going to be held out of the World Cup. I mean, that's a big deal.
The one way this could happen, and it did happen once before, it's the English Premier League started the same way. It's the same exact system that the English Premier League started from, but they adhered to the relegation principle and they plugged back into the rest of English football. So I mean, if they found a way to do it across Europe where it actually still held true to some type of system, maybe that could happen. But this already exists. You already have a European Championship, multiple European Championship leagues where the best teams in the continent play each other. So I mean, it already exists. They just want to do it to where it's safe every year, and they know they're going to make X amount of money. And it's mostly foreign owners. It's mostly Americans and Asian owners. So I think it's people that don't understand the tradition of the sport trying to make as much money as they can, and they got pushed back on.
Speaking of not understanding the sport, I know all my European listeners were probably laughing when I said regulation instead of relegation. So, of course, I do not understand the sport as well as you all. Chris, do you have anything to add here? I mean, I think we've talked around the subject so much, but I wanted to give you a chance to weigh in.
No, University of Michigan doesn't play, so I have no idea what's going on. You guys did great.
Well, let's move on then. One of the pandemic moves that live theater took to preserve itself during the pandemic was the introduction of ad-supported streaming performances. Now, as the pandemic is hopefully winding down, as we kind of noted at the beginning of the show, everybody's getting their shots, and if you haven't got your shot, you should get your shot. There's a drive to keep this revenue stream flowing and keep live theater streaming its content to the masses. And part of that is because it's generating lots of ad revenue. Maybe not tons of ad revenue, but at least a moderate amount of ad revenue as a result of it streaming to a much wider audience. So, Jason, is this a reasonable expectation, and do we expect theaters to start live streaming their performances sooner rather than later as we go forward into this post-pandemic world?
Yeah, I mean, this is a subject that I know very well as a live event producer for our conferences, and having to do live streamed events over the last year and a half going now. I mean, I think it's a bigger trend. Live streaming has been huge over the course of 2020. We've taught an entire, world of consumers how to produce and consume live streamed events online. I think theater, concerts, comedians all took advantage of this and grew audience and built reach through live streamed events. I think there's obviously going to be a dip. There's already a dip. We've already gone back to somewhat of pre-pandemic levels of consuming live stream, at least from what I'm seeing on the social networks, on Facebook and Instagram especially. But I think there's a built-in kind of education that's not going away. People are more comfortable with it. They understand that they can pay to see an event online, or they can see a free event online. I still remember from, I think it was April of last year, there was a Billie Eilish concert that I watched at the beginning of the pandemic, and Billie and her brother were playing in their living room to literally millions of people, sponsored by Verizon. And I still remember today that it was sponsored by Verizon. I mean, that's tremendous brand recall over a year later of an online event, right? So I think for theaters, it's something they have to keep doing. It's something that can completely grow their reach. I mean, we're doing our third virtual conference, social media conference, coming up in June, and we typically have 300 to 400 people that we host in person, and we had 1,500 to 2,000 people at our virtual event last year. So the potential reach is huge, and the revenue is going to not be as significant, obviously, but you can combine those audiences. You can have hybrid events, and you can really grow audience through these channels. And I think every live event experience should be looking for some type of opportunity like this, because I don't think that trend is going to stop. It reminds me of how NPR now is going to get a majority of their revenue from podcasting versus live radio, like that shift. I think we're going to see a similar shift where it's, the live event is still very important and will exist and will dominate, but, having a large alternative revenue stream that can reach audiences that can't attend your in-person event or can't, can access it in new ways is going to be very important for anybody doing these types of businesses.
I find it really interesting to hear what you said, because you have some firsthand experience with dealing with this, but it's also dovetailing really well into some of the things that I've been hearing about, like what Time Warner's doing with HBO Max and how they're doing day and date releases, and how well certain movies are doing in the theater while they're streaming for free to any person who has an HBO Max account. It's not diminishing box office at all. I mean, Godzilla versus Kong took in $30 million in its opening weekend, which is on par with what was expected for the film to take in theaters. And I watched it on my screen at home. So I don't understand why anyone would go to the theater, but, but people do. And I find that interesting. But when you come to live theater, there's something different about it than live events or movies or television. I mean, there's something about it that needs the room, to be in that experience and that communal experience. I talk a lot about theater because, I'm involved with someone who is involved with theater. So I know a lot about it, but there's just this magic that happens in the room that's not captured on video. And I'm wondering, will consumers still want to be part of that? I mean, Sloane, maybe you can weigh in here on your thoughts. Will consumers really still want to stream content or see a produced version of a video produced version of the musical or the theatrical experience when they could just go see it in person, which is a much better experience?
I mean, for sure, you can't deny there is that magic of being there in person, and my sports world, it's the same thing. But I think the beauty of this and what excites me is that this could make theater so much more accessible to people all around the world. And it could ultimately, I think, drive a whole new appreciation for this kind of storytelling. And, you think about whether it's, kids that live really far away from like the ability to get, to a show, or they don't have the funds or whatever it might be. I think it really could make this so much more accessible, and it could actually, even end up driving more people to that live experience in time. So to me, like, the pandemic obviously has been full of just horrible, horrible things, but there are some things that we've created during the pandemic that I hope will stick around. And it's definitely things like this.
Yeah, I can see it being a great addendum, something to add on. And it's not going, I really think that the big fear from theater for a long time was that digital representations of their performances, live performances, whether it's cell phones taking videos or pictures, all that stuff was anathema to them. The whole idea of streaming at the same time that you're producing this live performance. I think what the pandemic is teaching us is that you can do both. I mean, going back to the HBO Max example, you can do both and it still pays out. People are still going to the theater to see Godzilla fight Kong. It's not going to diminish your revenue in any appreciable way to do something like that. So I think theater can probably benefit from that in the same way. Something else that Jason said that really resonated with me, Chris, is the idea that Verizon sponsored that concert he saw, the Billie Eilish concert, and he still remembers it. And I'm wondering, what's your thoughts on that? Is that something that continues to stick with you more because you're watching a live event or something? Is that going to make you more friendly toward the advertisers or sponsors, or is that more just a one-off type experience because, we're in the pandemic and this is the first time this is kind of happening. So of course you're much more aware of things. It's like, like the first banner ad had a 25% click-through rate because it was such a novelty, what I mean?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think people really were looking for unique experiences. And I think what really made that experience unique, obviously, wasn't the Verizon sponsorship, but I think what made it memorable with the Verizon component was it was something happening with the artists right in their own living room. And in a time when we're all together in our own living room and everyone, no matter how famous and popular and interesting you might be and world traveled you might be, you were in your living room last year a lot. And so I think that kind of let a really unique moment kind of happen. I don't know what those moments look like kind of going post-pandemic and what happens with, live performances that have a streaming element. I love what Sloane said, which is, it gives more access to people who, either didn't feel the value trade-off was worth kind of attending it physically or they couldn't do it because of physical distance or whatever it might be. I mean, I was thinking about the Hamilton performance that was released on HBO Max last year, right? I think somewhere around
Disney Plus
in the summer, right?
Disney Plus. It was on Disney Plus.
Disney Plus. Yeah, that's right. I had Disney Plus for a few seconds just to watch that, I think, and something else. The Mandalorian. And so, but we got rid of it pretty quick. But anyway, we watched that on Disney Plus. We enjoyed it. We had looked at tickets, a couple of years ago, and I think it was $1,600 for my wife and I to go to it with the kids. And it was like, yeah, I don't think that's really what I want to spend $1,600 on. So I was glad I got to see it. I don't feel it was as special or as connected. And I think there is definitely something more personal and also more memorable when you actually go to a show, whether that's a live play or a live concert. No one remembers the DVD concert they watched of their favorite performer. They remember the tickets that they had on the night they went and saw the person at the Hollywood Bowl or something like that. That's a more memorable experience, and it's what you talk about. And I think people are going to return and in a big way. And if there's an element of streaming that exists for access and maybe a small portion that, feel they enjoy that way of, digesting the content, then that's fine. But I don't think it's going to be that big. I think it's going to taper off pretty significantly. And I see that also with movie theaters as well. But that's kind of a whole nother topic.
Yeah. All relevant points, though. Does anybody on the panel believe that this is an ad opportunity waiting to happen? That, we've kind of been, the only place we can advertise in theaters most of the time is in the playbill, if they have a playbill. That's about the only ad opportunity we tend to have when it comes to live theater. And I'm wondering, does the opportunity to market to such a high-end audience, let's face it, it costs a lot to go to a Broadway show or to do theater in New York. I mean, to be able to market to an audience that would be interested in theater, that seems like it's a really great opportunity for us as marketers, but is it? And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Well, it's an underwriting opportunity. I mean, same as NPR, or if you look at like the way some tennis tournaments and golf tournaments are underwritten with the name being essential. Just, that Billie Eilish concert, I think that was a unique experience for sure, but it was brought to you by, it was one sponsor, right? The reason it's memorable is because there was one sponsor. If you go to a concert,
and it was also memorable because it was a demonstration of their network. I mean, they broadcast it live on their network, so it's a great demonstration.
Although that didn't hit my brain. That doesn't matter to me as a viewer. Right. It just matters to me that I'm viewing this, and hey, there's one sponsor. It's a narrow focused sponsorship, and I think theaters can do that. I think they can take that opportunity. And I think, Sloan really hit this on the head, and it's something I've seen when we do our conferences and we were trying to consider, should we live stream our conferences, is that, as we were having physical events, 6-7 years ago, we made these decisions, and it was a 2 audience thing. There's 2 audiences. There's audiences that can attend your event, whether it's because they have the, the calendar, the budget, the geography, location, whatever it is. There's people that can't attend your event, and there's people, 99% of people in the world, that can't attend your event when you're doing a live event. And the virtual opportunity exists to capitalize on that huge audience that can't attend your event. And that's even more significant, I think, for theater, because theater, most people can't attend Broadway. Most people have never attended Broadway. This amazing experiences in New York City. Some of them catch the traveling shows when they come through their cities, but even then, it's a minor audience. I think there's a huge reach opportunity for these organizations to broaden the scope of the type of audience they're reaching out to. And if they do it right, I think they can definitely have significant revenue and significant branding opportunities from it.
Well,
and streaming's not going to slow down. I mean, I disagree with Chris a little bit, and Chris, respond if I'm mischaracterizing it. But I think streaming is going to continue this growth. I think we may see a slight dip after the pandemic, but streaming's not going away. Like sports, entertainment, live events, comedy, music, everything's going to go to streaming. Everyone's going to be watching things from their phone, from their living room, from wherever they are. And I think, if you're not taking advantage of that by having a system set up to capture that, I think that's a mistake.
I guess my point was more the consumption of it as an alternative to the real world experience of things is going to go ahead and kind of take a dip. In other words, people are going to return back to their normal behaviors, and streaming definitely has a place in that, but I don't think it's going to be as significant as it's been during the pandemic. That's my point. But thanks.
Well, I want to do one last topic before we wrap up. We kind of last week did a huge thing on diversity, and I was loath to do yet another diversity topic, but this is a really interesting one from the Drum. The Drum last week took a look at education and mentorship initiatives as a means of recruiting and guiding diverse talent into the ad world. I thought it was really fascinating how, the assumption that we can change the minds at the top is not always the best way to approach things, that you have to start at the bottom as well and get the diverse talent in there, mentor diverse talent into leadership positions and grow them into the leadership of agencies. So Sloane, is it enough to rely on tactics that may take decades or more to change leadership? I mean, it's just like we're trying to get the top levels to accept more diversity and to be more proactive in fostering a diverse workplace. That's like slow as molasses anyway. So does it make sense to start from the bottom and start doing that? And is it enough, or should we still be hammering away at the top?
I mean, the short answer, in my opinion, is that it's not enough. it's awesome to, to factor education and mentorship into diversity. Like I firmly believe that that's really important. But there has to be more. And, it's been done in so many different verticals, or at least started. And I think there's been such a cry for this, especially over the course of the last maybe 10 months or a year or so. You really are seeing people like demanding this in a way that I think that, they haven't done it maybe quite as vocally or quite as widely as we've seen over the last year. So I think it's incredibly important for this to, be sped up a little bit. Like, yes, let's start at the bottom, but let's also work from the top down. And it is going to take a lot of rethinking about how business is done for agencies, and rethinking about agency culture as a whole. And I think that, there's probably going to have to be some momentum to hold agencies accountable, which that might be for agency leadership, but also for employees. And I even wonder about clients, like if that's something that, they might grasp a hold of and really kind of demand as well.
Jason, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, Sloane brings up a great point. There's got to be a hybrid model to this. We have to be working from the top. We have to be continuing to hammer away and try to get change now. That it's a good idea to do education and mentorship. So that's part of it. Is there a place for us to play in the middle as well? I mean, the average workplace interactions, how do we change that? Because diversity training is not doing the trick. And I'm wondering, how do you change people's hearts? How do you educate people? How do you bring people into the spirit of a diverse workplace when they're just oblivious to, when the average worker that you're dealing with is just oblivious to the problem to begin with?
Yeah, if you talk to anybody that works in diversity, they'll tell you that it's a spectrum of interactions over a lifetime, really. Like, what are you seeing as mentors, as leaders when you're a kid, when you're in school? What are you seeing as opportunities when you're in high school and college? What majors are an opportunity for you? Who's talking to you when you're applying for jobs once you get into business, et cetera, et cetera. And it's all of it. I mean, I think this is important. I think, there's a systemic nature, especially I think in the advertising industry, that's very clear, that just is heavily weighted toward white dudes. Speaking as a white dude, I've seen it, I've benefited from it. And so one of the things we do at Social Fresh is we've worked for, 7 years now to make sure our stage is majority women. And that's, taking a little work to do that. We do it every conference now. It's 50% or more women. And now we've established a diversity goal to make sure that the racial makeup of our speakers is also, above 30% non-white, and that's taken some work. And it takes a little bit of attention, takes a little bit of work. And the one lesson I've learned is you just have to do it first. If you set a diversity goal, you have to do it before you do anything else. So I don't book a white guy as a speaker until I've met all my diversity goals.
Don't forget us.
And I think that's important.
Don't forget us disabled people.
Yes. Well, and we have several considerations. We try to make sure LGBT is represented. We try to make sure if we have opportunities to book disabled speakers, that's represented. We try to make sure everything that our audience has shown us is represented is important. Our audience is a majority women. So I mean, that was the first step that we took because that was really important for us. So the one thing I see in corporate America that doesn't happen is they set diversity goals and they don't really care if they don't meet them. They don't really react if they don't meet them. I mean, you have to be more aggressive. And I think part of it is systemic, but they've shown in tech, for instance, that there's plenty of women, there's plenty of BIPOC, non-white developers that get into the system, that get hired into tech as developers, and they just don't stick around because it's not a welcoming culture. So I think your question is right, Bob. I think, honestly, it takes a really big statement from the top that just hasn't happened in a lot of companies, where this is so important that if it doesn't happen, your salary is going to be impacted, your employment is going to be impacted, this company is going to be impacted if we don't reach these goals. And it's just not big enough goal for companies. It hasn't been prioritized enough for those things to happen. And I think until the C-level actually says something to the effect that motivates people or puts process into effect that gives them the ability to solve these problems, it doesn't happen. But I will say, just like a final point, marketing, most kids that go to college, kids of color, don't go into marketing. They don't think of it as an opportunity. If you look at the statistics, there's just fewer people of color majoring in advertising and marketing. And because of that, there is a pipeline issue. I don't think it's significant enough to account for what we see as the discrepancy in the industry, but it is a piece of it. I don't know if it's the most important piece, but it's important for this work to happen.
Engineering and advertising should get together and talk, because they both seem to have the same problems. Don't ask me how I know that, but I do. Anyway, I can't wrap this up any better than you just did, so I'm just going to wrap up this part of the show. It's time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul, but before we get to that segment, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug, starting with Chris Baccus. You can find him at urw.com. I'm sure you can find him other places because he's a prolific blogger. But tell us, what's going on in your world? What would you like to promote, Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Well, I used to be a prolific blogger, too busy these days for the blog world, but, definitely doing the Instagram and the Twitter and all that stuff. So let's see Baccus, Baccus. So hit me up on there if you want to chat anytime. Always up for a good conversation with fellow advertising colleagues. But nothing really to plug. Just great to be on the show. Great conversation with some really excellent guests today. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We love having you on the program. You're always fun to have on. Now, next, we have Jason Keath. You can find him at socialfresh.com. That's the company he founded and that he runs and does all the CEO type things. So tell us what's going on in your world. What would you like to promote?
Yeah, well, we have our third virtual conference of the pandemic coming up in June, 16th to 18th. And, we're probably going to perfect the virtual conference format right as we don't have to do them anymore. But
of course,
you can check it out at socialfresh.com/2021. We've got Hulu and Lyft and Johns Hopkins and Twitter and Google, and the state of New Jersey, which I'm really excited about, is speaking. They've got a lovely Twitter account that's amazing. But check out all the speakers, a ton of great speakers. If you want to know what's working in social media today from, leading brands that are getting their hands dirty, we're the place for you to learn that. So socialfresh.com/2021.
And Jason and his team run a fantastic event. They really, really do. So if you haven't been to a Social Fresh event, whether it's online or in person, you definitely got to check it out. Last but not least, we have Sloane Kelley. You can find her at 9, that's the number 9, rooftops.com. Tell us what's going on. So I should say, that's where she's the vice president of social media. Now I will say, Sloane, what would you like to promote?
Yeah, 9rooftops.com is a great place to keep up on all of the great work that our agency is up to. And likewise on the socials, 9rooftops, the number 9.
That's fantastic. And you explained that to me last time. It's a pretty amazing thing, bringing together such diverse talent from across the country into one shop. That's pretty amazing.
Absolutely.
As for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me. And, of course, you can find out how to advertise on this program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And now it is time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul, a rundown of the best and worst of advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. First up, Jason, I'm going to say the fair for this week is going to be Heinz relying entirely on its logo shape to carry its new ad campaign. I mean, it's not entirely original. I mean, I've seen something like this before, but I think it's so well done and so well executed and is not overly like pushing your nose in it, like get it. You got to use your brain a little bit and look at this ad and you see the logo out of the food, and it's so elegant the way that it's put together. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think it's really clever. I think it's so clever that it's probably more designed for, awards than it is for the actual consumer. I mean, I saw these ads. I think they're beautiful. I think they're well done. I see the crest, but I kind of saw it coming. I don't know if I would know the shape of the Heinz crest really in my head, and maybe that's just me as a consumer not being like a huge ketchup consumer. I don't know if it might just be me in this scenario, but it didn't really. I don't know if I would have opened that in a magazine or some type of print scenario and been like, oh, that's Heinz. I mean, I guess I would have gotten there, ketchup, Heinz, but it just it didn't take me to the fair place that it took you, I don't think. But I much preferred the same agency did the work for where they had to draw. They had a bunch of people draw a ketchup bottle, and most people drew it in the shape of Heinz. I thought that was much more clever. But maybe I'm just the Grinch in this scenario.
In some ways, I think, no, I don't think you're being a Grinch. I think it does take a little bit of extra thought, and people who are into brands would recognize it more. But, I mean, it's a fan service ad in a lot of ways because, I mean, people are having the Heinz logo tattooed on them. There's an English singer who famously got tattooed with a Heinz 57 logo. But, I mean, there's just real love for this shape, and I think that it does get a lot of attention, the Keystone. But yeah, good points. Well, the fail for this week, a third-party seller on Amazon UK marketed a tent, Sloan, that even women can easily get done, meaning they can set it up easily. This was obviously called out for sexism, and as it was called out, she got heckled back as a result of calling it out. So this one is it's just amazing to me how many Amazon third-party sellers are actively just doing things wrong in the way that they market their products still to this day.
Yeah, this was brutal. I mean, it's hard to imagine who in their right mind thought this was a good idea. I mean, yikes. But yeah, unfortunate for the woman that called this out. She did get heckled on online, but yeah, I don't even know what to do with this one. But yeah, I mean, putting a tent together, I don't think there's anything about that is gender specific.
Let me tell you, I can put together a tent, but I struggle with it every time. So there you go, guys. And it's just like, raise your hand. Don't blame the women for this one. The foul for this week, I'm going to give to YouTube makeup star James Charles. Chris, have you been reading the stuff of this? YouTube is demonetizing him over inappropriate texts with underage boys. I'm just kind of like at my end with a lot of the ways that YouTube stars are behaving. And the way this ties in with us is obviously he's an influencer, so advertisers are tied to this person. It just reminds us that we have to do a little bit more research and a little bit more due diligence before we do deals with influencers to make sure that we're not getting in bed with the next Jared.
Yeah, I mean, James has some big billboards around Los Angeles, or at least did before the pandemic. I've been driving as much as I used to, but he's an interesting guy, person that does amazing makeup videos and has really been a key person in the beauty space for quite a while, especially at YouTube and now on TikTok and some other channels. Listen, it's unfortunate what's happening, and I wasn't really aware of what was going on here until some of the prep for the show, so I can't say I've been following the story, but I did familiarize myself with it, and listen, he's being called out for some flirty conversations with two 16-year-olds that he claims were people that told him they were 18. I don't know. I've watched too many To Catch a Predators to have always the person tell you that everyone's always over 18 that they're engaging with. I don't know if that's the case with James Charles, but it's kind of doubtful and it's unfortunate. And you're right. You got to watch who you work with. But listen, he wasn't accused of these things a while back ago. This stuff can happen and be revealed later. So it's very tough when brands really attach themselves to one individual. It'll be interesting to see what happens with some of the makeup lines that he's been involved in.
Well, have a suggestion for this list or just want to discuss it? Comment online. Use the hashtag #FairFailFoul. That's #FairFailFoul. And that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcast listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on the Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
You know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. Just like, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, you know, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.